There's something about Shanks that almost nobody talks about, but once you understand it, it completely changes how you see this character. Everybody knows he's one of the 4 Yonko, that he lost an arm to Whitebeard, that he has a scar over his eye, and that he's without a doubt one of the strongest swordsmen who has ever appeared in this story. But what few people stop to think about is this: how does a man with no devil fruit at all end up so absurdly powerful that Kato backs off just from looking at him? And the answer to that question isn't in Shanks' body. It's in his sword. Because, contrary to what you've always believed, Shanks does have a devil fruit. It's just that it isn't inside him. It's inside the blade he's carried for decades. And here's the wild part, that fruit might be the missing piece to understanding what Shanks' true final goal really is in this story. Stay until the end, because this is one of those theories that sounds crazy until you see the evidence. The paradox of the fruitless Yonko. Let's start with the obvious part, because the obvious part here is exactly what doesn't add up. In One Piece, power and devil fruits practically go hand in hand. Blackbeard has 2 fruits, which alone breaks the rules of this universe. Kato was the most feared dragon man on the seas. Big Mom became immortal through the soul fruit. Luffy awakens as Nika, the sun god. Even Buggy, who's mostly treated as comic relief, has a fruit officially registered and recognized by the world government. And in the middle of all that stands Shanks. No fruit at all. Just hockey, and yet he's on the same level as, or above, the other 3 Yonko. That alone would be strange enough, but the problem gets bigger when you look at his entire crew. There isn't a single confirmed devil fruit user among the red hair pirates. Not one. And that's almost impossible to explain when you consider the level of strength a Yonko crew needs to maintain its position. At the top of the New World, the only comparable crew in the entire history of One Piece is Galdi, Rogers, and even there the exception is basically an accident. Buggy ate the chop fruit by mistake, trying to hide it in his mouth to sell it later, and ended up swallowing it at the worst possible moment after Shanks startled him. Buggy still holds a grudge about that to this day, and there's a detail revealed by Kato himself in chapter 1047 that a lot of people gloss over. Roger never had a devil fruit. Everything he achieved was through raw strength and hockey. And the way Kato says this isn't dismissive at all. It's genuine admiration, as if that were something rare and almost hard to comprehend. That suggests something specific. Roger knew something about devil fruits that most people don't. Something that made him avoid relying on that kind of power in the first place, and Shanks grew up inside that crew. As a child, soaking up everything Roger taught, directly or indirectly. So it's no coincidence that he followed the same path. There's a pattern forming here. Neither Roger, nor Shanks, nor anyone truly close to either of them trusts devil fruits as a primary source of power. And that raises the right question: is there some secret about these fruits that still hasn't been fully revealed? Something that makes them more of a liability than an advantage? Because if that's true, it makes complete sense that someone like Shanks, who clearly knows more about the world than he lets on, would find an alternative way to access that kind of power. A way that doesn't require eating the fruit. And that's exactly what seems to be hidden inside his sword. Objects that eat fruits, a mechanic Oda has used before since the earliest arcs of One Piece. Oda already showed that inanimate objects can also ingest a devil fruit. Lasso. Mr. 4E's bazooka ate the fruit of a dog named Shu and became a combat dog. Spandam's sword, Funkfried, ate an elephant's fruit and turned into a giant trunk capable of dealing brutal damage for a long time. Those examples felt like nothing more than world-building curiosities. Fun little details to show how flexible the fruit system can be. But they make one thing clear: the mechanic exists, it's established within the story's own rules, and it has already been used more than once. What was missing was a reason to believe this mechanic would come back in a much more central way, and think about the pattern in those 2 earlier examples. In both cases, it was an object directly tied to a character who needed extra strength in combat. A fighter's bazooka, the sword of an elite swordsman working for the world government's top enforcers. That detail isn't irrelevant. It shows that within the story's own logic, giving a devil fruit to a weapon isn't just possible, it's a deliberate strategic choice, usually involving someone with advanced enough technical knowledge to control the process. And that points directly to a name that keeps coming up whenever advanced devil fruit manipulation is involved: Vegapunk. We'll get back to him, That bigger, more central reason showed up in chapter 1138. Shanks Figerland and the Cerberus sword. In that chapter, Shanks Figerland, the red hair's twin brother, finally appears in combat. And guess what he uses? A sword called Cerberus, one that carries the power of a mythical zone. It transforms into a giant three-headed dog with the same name as the blade. The guardian of the underworld in Greek mythology, Shanks Figerland throws this sword at Loki, one of the most powerful warriors in Elbaf, and the creature attacks on its own with enough force to seriously injure him. In other words, the sword fights by itself, like a living entity. And the most interesting detail here isn't just the power, it's the design. Shanks Figerland's sword is a closed-hilt saber, almost identical to the one Shanks the Red Hair carries. And both designs closely resemble the sword belonging to their father, Garling Figerland, three characters from the same family. Three sabers in practically the same visual style. That's not a coincidence in the way Oda builds symbolism into this story. When he repeats a design this closely, with this much precision, it's because he's deliberately planting a connection. The name Griffin and Oda's own confession, and this is where the theory stops being just visual speculation and gets a solid foundation straight from the author himself. In the SBS of Volume 87, a reader asked what the name of Shanks' sword was. Oda answered that it's called Griffin. But he didn't stop at the simple answer. He added that he's known Shanks since Chapter 1, and that he still asks himself how Shanks actually fights with that sword. Think carefully about that. The creator of the character, who knows absolutely everything about him, openly says he still can't fully explain how Shanks fights with his own weapon. That only makes sense if his fighting style isn't conventional. If it's not just swinging a sword, but something tied to an ability Oda is deliberately saving for the right moment to reveal, and the chosen name reinforces this even further. In mythology, a griffin is a creature with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle, associated with guarding treasure and protecting whatever is most precious. And in another SBS, Oda revealed that Shanks' spirit animal is the lion, which fits perfectly with the griffin symbolism. The pieces line up. Shanks' lion and the guardian griffin are essentially the same figure, just with wings added. The theory I'm proposing is that Shanks' sword ate the mythical zone fruit of the griffin, the same way his twin brother's sword ate the mythical zone fruit of Cerberus. The two swords are nearly identical in design. Both carry the name of a mythological guardian. Cerberus guards the underworld and decides who enters. The griffin guards treasure and decides who gets close. Two brothers with nearly identical swords, both wielding mythical creature powers. It doesn't stop there. In Greek mythology, there's another, lesser-known detail. The griffin was considered a sacred animal, directly linked to Apollo, the sun god, precisely because it united the king of land animals, the lion, with the king of sky animals, the eagle. It's a creature that represents total dominion, earth and sky, strength and vision combined. If Oda really meant for this symbolism to be intentional, the name choice isn't just about guarding treasure, it's about a being that sees beyond normal reach, protecting something sacred tied to a solar source. And remember, Nika, the fruit Luffy awakens, is also described as the sun god. If that connection is intentional, it brings Shanks even closer to the role of direct guardian over what would eventually become Luffy's power. The proof hidden in the anime itself, but there's an even more direct piece of evidence, and it's literally on screen. In episode 1112, when Shanks intercepts Eustace Kid's attack to protect his allies' ships, he draws the Griffin sword and channels the strike with Conqueror's Haki. At the exact moment of the attack, the animation shows, for a split second, the massive silhouette of a griffin materializing around Shanks. Lion's body, eagle's wings, exactly like the mythological creature the sword is named after. This detail isn't in the manga. It was an exclusive addition made by the anime. And that matters because productions at this level don't insert this kind of imagery randomly, especially in such a calculated, decisive, visually loaded moment. The choice to show the griffin's silhouette at that specific instant is, in practice, a visual confirmation of that blade's true nature. There's also another, lesser-known moment worth mentioning, taken from a novel focused on Zoro. In it, two Marines argue about who the greatest swordsman in the world really is. One defends Shanks, citing the moment he stopped Akainu with a single hand during the Battle of Marineford. The other disagrees, saying that's nowhere close to Shanks' true peak with a blade. In other words, Someone who saw Shanks fight in person claims that stopping a fleet admiral with one hand isn't even close to his real limit. And if that's not his limit, what is? The most logical answer is exactly the final form of the Griffin blade, the full power of the mythical zone hidden inside it. How a sword ate a legendary fruit? Now comes the most important question: how exactly did Shanks end up with a sword carrying a mythical zone inside it? The answer runs through his family, the Figerlands, one of the world noble houses. Shanks and Shanks Figerland were born twins and separated during the God Valley incident while still babies. One of them was left behind and found by Gall D. Roger inside a treasure chest growing up as a pirate. The other was raised by the Holy Knights alongside their father, Garling Figerland, who for a long time commanded that organization. The Elbaf arc gave us flashbacks showing that at some point over the last 15 years, Shanks traveled to Mary Geoise to meet that side of his family. It was during that period that he most likely received the Griffin sword, the same way his twin brother received Cerberus. And here's where another name ties everything together: Vegapunk. As far as the story has shown, he's the only character capable of deliberately making an inanimate object eat a devil fruit in a controlled way. And Vegapunk worked for the world government during exactly the period when Shanks was in Mary Geoise, meaning he had direct access to the resources, weapons, and projects tied to the Holy Knights. It's also worth remembering that Vegapunk is the scientist behind breakthroughs that practically rewrote the rules of the One Piece world: devil fruit cloning, the creation of the Seraphim, deep research into the lost 800 years of history. For someone with that level of knowledge, deliberately making an object eat a fruit, specifically choosing a rare mythical zone, isn't anywhere near the limit of his capabilities. If anything, it would be a relatively simple project compared to the rest of the work he's already done for the world government, preparing special swords with mythical zones for warriors connected to the Figerland family is exactly the kind of project someone like Vegapunk would be asked to develop. The three swords, the fathers, Shanks Figerlands and Shanks the Red Hairs, most likely come from the same process, the same origin, within the Holy Land. That would also explain why all three share such a similar visual pattern. It's not a coincidence in design. It's literally the same maker, the same project, maybe even the same batch of weapons prepared specifically for elite members tied to the top of the world government. Why Shanks left that world behind? But if the sword comes from there, why didn't Shanks ever go back to openly use that power or get close to the world nobles again? The answer lies in his own personality. During his time in Mary Geoise, Shanks realized the world nobles weren't the kind of people he could relate to. The arrogance, the cruelty, the belief that they're descended from gods and that ordinary lives don't matter. None of that matched who he was raised to be. Shanks grew up as a pirate, living a simple, hard life, surrounded by a crew he genuinely considered family. Because of that, he decided that world of nobility wasn't his place, and he went back to the sea. But he kept the sword, not because he wanted power for its own sake, but because, in the end, that weapon became part of who he is. Shanks' true role in the story, and this is where everything connects to what might actually be Shanks' final goal within the plot. In Greek mythology, the griffin isn't just a powerful creature. It's specifically a guardian of treasure, protecting what's most valuable to its master and only allowing the worthy to get close. Now look at Shanks' trajectory throughout the story. He's the one who ended up with Roger's straw hat, the former Pirate King's most personal treasure. He's the one who was, even if indirectly, entrusted with the gum fruit, which we now know is actually the mythical fruit of the sun god. Nika, he's the one who inspired Luffy to become a pirate, handing over exactly that hat, and along with it, a piece of Roger's legacy, and we know Roger reached Laugh Tale too soon, unable to finish what needed to be done, because something essential was missing, most likely Nika himself. Given that by Roger's implicit order or by direct inheritance, Shanks may have taken on the role of guardian of that legacy, protecting the secret of Laugh Tale, watching over his old captain's treasure, and quietly guiding the right person toward the path to the One Piece. That would explain why Shanks reacts the way he does when Luffy awakens as Nika. The moment he sees Luffy's transformed form on the bounty poster, Shanks declares it's time to go after the One Piece. That's not just pride in a prot G, it's the Guardian recognizing that the worthy one has finally been found. The final link to Roger's will there's one more layer to this theory that connects everything even more directly. When Roger reached Laughtail, he laughed at what he found there, a laugh that became the very reason behind the island's name. But along with that laugh came the sense that something had been left unfinished. Roger knew he wasn't the one meant to carry that secret all the way to the end. The right piece, the right heir, was missing. Possibly Nika's awakening itself, and if Shanks was already carrying, even without fully grasping the scope of it at the time, a sword tied to a mythological guardian, then Roger may have recognized in him the ideal person to fulfill that protective role until the true heir came along. Not necessarily as a direct order, but as a recognition of character. Roger saw someone trustworthy in Shanks, someone who wouldn't use that kind of power selfishly. And that, within the story's own logic, is exactly the kind of thing a captain like him would value in a successor he could trust. That would also explain why Shanks never tried to claim the title of Pirate King for himself. Even though he most likely has more than enough strength to do it, he isn't competing for the treasure. He's guarding the path to it. Putting it all together to sum it all up, Shanks is the only Yonko without his own devil fruit, but through the Griffin sword, he may have access to the power of a mythical zone without ever having to eat it. The sword's name was confirmed by Oda himself, along with a cryptic comment about how he still doesn't fully understand Shanks' fighting style. The anime showed, even if just briefly, the silhouette of a griffin forming during the single most powerful strike we've ever seen from this character. His twin brother carries an almost identical sword, with a confirmed mythical zone and the name of another mythological guardian. All three swords from the Figurland family share the same visual style. And in mythology, the griffin represents exactly the role Shanks occupies in the narrative, guardian of the world's greatest treasure. I believe Oda has been planting this piece for many chapters now, waiting for the right moment to confirm it all at once. And with the Elbaf arc revealing the Figurland family, Shanks' Figurland sword, and Shanks' past in Mary Goes, that moment seems closer than ever. And if you want to dig even deeper into Shanks' past, including the real reason he lost his arm to a Sea King even though he's one of the strongest beings alive, I've got a full video covering that, along with 9 other One Piece decisions that look like mistakes but actually have a much deeper explanation. It's on screen right now, just click it. But for today, that's it. I really hope you enjoyed this theory, and if you did, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell, because that way you won't miss a single new video like this one. Thanks so much for sticking around with me, and see you next time.